Again in Osun State, where voting has ended at polling units across the state, with election officials commencing the sorting and counting of ballots in the governorship election. The transition to collation follows a day marked by strong voter turnout, isolated technical challenges, and allegations of irregularities at some polling units, while security agencies say the overall situation remained peaceful. Across the state's 3,763 polling units, INEC officials sorted ballot papers by political parties before counting votes cast by accredited voters in the presence of party agents and election observers. Results announced at each polling unit are expected to be documented and forwarded to the ward and local government collation centers as the electoral process moves to its next stage. In the meantime, the Independent National Electoral Commission has begun uploading polling unit results from the Osun State governorship election to its INEC results viewing portal called IREV. The process commenced after voting concluded at polling units across the state, with officials moving into sorting, counting and results documentation. INEC had fixed 2:30 p.m. as the official close of voting, while allowing polling to continue in units where accreditation had begun before the deadline. The Commission says results will continue to be uploaded to IREV as collation progresses across the state's polling units. Earlier, Osun State Governor Ademola Adeleke cast his vote. Adeleke voted at Unit 009, Ward 02, Abogunde Shagba in Ede North local government area, shortly after arriving at the polling unit at about 8:30 a.m. The governor, who is seeking another term in office, was among the early voters at the polling unit. After casting his ballot, Adeleke expressed confidence in the outcome of the election.
Police officer from Port Harcourt, they brought him, the APC Osun, brought it to come and do a job to destroy my town agent so that people will not vote. So I want the Inspector of Police to take note and do the needful. See, Police Commissioner election, DIG election, she take note. And all my people there should watch out. That's number one. And I have it on authority of information that they don't want to go through the normal process of from units to ward and to local government. They want to just take it all the way to the collation center, and that is not acceptable. They must follow the rules, and that is why I'm alerting my people to watch out. And I know, by the special grace of God, I'm winning this election.
In the meantime, other gubernatorial candidates also cast their votes in the ongoing election. The APC's Bola Oyebamiji has voted in his polling unit in Ikire, Irewole local government area. ADC's Najim Folashayo Salam also cast his vote at Ironyanyo Open Space polling unit 13, Elejigbo Elejamo Ward, Ejigbo local government area.
Well, everything is going on well. The election is going peacefully. The INEC are doing their job. At the same time, the security people are attending where they go to parties that are one or two places where they want to cause trouble. The police are in charge. Things are going on. Well, I want to appeal to people that it is important that they need to conduct themselves and they need to vote peacefully. The security people has to be in charge. The INEC too, I think so far they have
It used to be a free and fair election with no rigging, manipulation, a level playing ground. I trust my God that I'm going to win the election.
Thank you very much.
Finally, sir, someone questioned that at your own polling units, they had to arrest people buying votes.
Here, well, you are just coming. Definitely, it cannot be my party. We are not into that. We canvass for the people, we let them know our programs, and that is exactly what we do.
And now to discuss the election, we are joined by CEO TAF Africa and an election observer is Jacob Epelle. We also have joining us is the Osun State lead, of course, Yaga Africa, Sophia Bichi, as well as Program Manager, Justice Development and Peacemakers Center, Festus Ojewumi. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us to discuss Osun State election. So I will start with Mr. Epelle. Now that the Osun governorship election has been held, and of course we are in the collation stage, how would you assess the overall conduct of the election?
Well, the overall conduct of the election have not come to an end. But I will give you an early assessment because they're still counting the votes and results have not been declared. So I'll give you a pre to an end of the process. So my assessment of the Osun gubernatorial election at this stage is that the election has been encouraging and shown sign of operational improvement by INEC, but the ultimate test of credibility now have shifted from voting to counting, collation, transmission, and declaration of results. From the reports available to us through our hub, and that's the EUSDGN hub, the figures are very interesting. We deployed 823 accredited observers across the 30 local government areas. The process was generally peaceful and orderly in many locations with impressive voter participation. I think INEC deserves some credit for deployment in the polling units observed by us. 83.7% had the full complement of sensitive and non-sensitive material. 7:30 and 8:30 a.m. precisely, there were BVAS challenges, 58 devices malfunction in 728 polling units observed, but approximately 71% of those cases were subsequently rectified and accreditation resumed. However, we must resist the temptation to declare any sort of result. It may be too early to call. There are serious integrity concerns that cannot be ignored. By noon, observers have reported incidents involving thuggery, attack on electoral officials, and voter intimidation. Our hub, the EUSGN, had recorded 323 reported cases of electoral offenses and irregularities, including 103 cases of vote trading, multiple voting, voter impersonation, obstruction of voters, campaigning around polling units, and exposure of ballot papers. These are factual reportage.
Okay, so
okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so we are still going to talk more about these electoral malpractices that you just mentioned. But quickly, we need to talk to our correspondent, Igbalaniyi, who, of course, is at the Collation Center. So tell us where you are actually, of course, and let's understand at what point are we now in this Osun electoral process.
Collation, for the collation officers to come, give their feedback, give their results, and submit it to the returning officer for their announcement. Everything seems ready. Everything that we need or they need is in order. Party agent seats are properly labeled. Observers also are labeled, and we've seen some observers even coming in here at some point. But what we cannot identify or we've not been able to confirm is if some of these collation officers have arrived with the results. We're talking about 30 local government areas here, and for now, some if I can put it, some organizations, some CSOs, some situation room are beginning to say they've gotten about 50%. INEC should have gotten about 50% of the result according to the IRF they monitored, but INEC has not given us any factual figures. And I'll quickly split my feedback into 4 segments. Speaking about the electorate, the party agent and stakeholders, INEC, which is the electoral umpire, and security. For security across board today, we saw police officers stationed across every single polling unit we went to today, from Ede South to Ayeda, the local government, to Irewole, to Ife, to a whole lot of places we visited today. We saw the presence of security operatives. Even on the roads, military, NSCDC, they flooded the place. So it gave some sort of calm to some of the places. We spoke to some of the electorate who said, oh, the fear of those security operatives, not the fear of them being scared, but the fear of those security operatives is what has calmed the place, which was a good sign for the security operatives. Now, coming back to the electorate, from various elections before now, voter apathy has been a major talk, major conversation we've had, or a lot of us have had across various elections. But for this election, that was different. The people of Osun came out en masse. In fact, that became so much of an headache for INEC. Across some polling units, there was so much that, in fact, as of now, we're hearing that some of the polling units are still voting. For example, the APC candidate polling unit in Irewole, we heard about 30 minutes ago that they were still voting. We were there ourselves earlier today, and we saw the massive crowd that was there, and they had just 2 BVAS. The BVAS were working perfectly, but of course, it can't take the people all at a time, so they have to wait their turn. And the same thing across board. We only noticed about 2 polling units from the ones we visited that had BVAS issues, and they were easily rectified. For INEC, talking about this election, as at 7:13, we already saw INEC officials at some of the polling units set up. They have their documents, their illustrative materials already posted on the wall. People were already checking, and they were just waiting for the commencement time, which was 8 a.m., 8:30 at some place, to start the voting process. And now, talking about the party agents and the stakeholders themselves, across board, most of them behaved calmly, but in some few places we could see a few gimmick on as regards vote buying. Although this time it seems it has gone digitally, that's why it's very hard to grab evidence across some of these places. But we could see some gimmicks. They move in some people and just try to have them show them what they are voting. But the police really did a lot to calm down, because they ensured the sanctity of the booth this time around. It was placed in a place that guaranteed. It was placed in a corner that guaranteed secrecy, so that when they actually cast their vote, it's not obvious to the public. So I think across board, a whole lot of stakeholders, people have stepped up. The voters, electorates themselves stepped up because they came out en masse. INEC stepped up. But yes, there's still so many other things they need to do, or they need to put in check. And the work is not even done. Just as the guest in the studio mentioned, this is just the first phase. The major phase, which has been one of the contention also, is the collation and announcement of results, which would determine if INEC will get more pass mark, or if the pass mark they currently are given will be increased. So for now, this is the feedback. We're waiting for the collation officers to arrive. They will be seated here on my right-hand side. Once they arrive, they give in their results, give it to the sign, and give it to the returning officer, who eventually collates it. We don't know how long that will take. This is 30 local governments we're talking about. But once they start coming in, we'll be able to give you the update.
That update, quite comprehensive, I must say. So you need to stay with us anyway. Of course, gentlemen, Jake and Sophia, including Festus, stay with us for a while. We need to quickly run off on this break. When we return, we'll pick the conversation. And thanks for staying with us. Yes, we're still looking at the Osun gubernatorial election. And of course, our guests are still here with us. So I'll just bring Festus into this conversation, picking it up from where our correspondent, that is Niyi, talked about strong security presence in the areas he visited, early arrival of officials and voting materials, but there were still issues of vote buying and pockets of violence in some areas. So what is your scorecard for the electoral umpire, the electorates in the state, and of course, the security team?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Let's talk about the issue of security agents. You recall that the Inspector General of Police already said that at least 4 police officers will be, minimum of 4 police officers will be at each of the polling units across the state. And we actually confirmed that in places visited. We actually saw like minimum of 4, not only police officers, there are officers of the NSCDC too. Of course, we saw immigration too, road safety were part of those people actually deployed. So in terms of security, we actually had enough. We visited some polling units where we had up to like 12 security agencies. So talking about that, of course, the deployment actually worked out in terms of the security operatives, and in some places we visited, they actually behaved themselves normally, and they were able to actually conduct and coordinate the process in terms of ensuring that polling units are in order. But in terms of vote buying, actually, like organization, Justice Development and Peacemaker Center actually visited 140 polling units. And out of these polling units, as a matter of fact, we recorded a number of votes buying. Although this issue of votes buying are not actually made public, there is a kind of prepaid votes buying, so to say, that some of the electorates had actually been prepped ahead of the election day in terms of giving them money. So some of the votes buying we experienced today, they are not all that conspicuous. But as an observer who has actually been tracking the issue of vote buying for years now, you can actually deduce manners and ways in which they carry this out. And we observe that the issue of vote buying actually range from some political parties actually pay ranging from like 10,000 naira to 50,000 naira. As a matter of fact, some places 20,000 naira per vote. So vote buying has actually been meant in our electoral system, and we shouldn't continue this way, honestly, because people should actually perform their responsibility without being induced.
Okay, so let's talk to Sophia Bichi, who is the team lead for Yaga Africa. Now, you had your observers, deployed to several local government areas of the state. In terms of what they reported, what is your assessment of this election? Do we have an election being conducted in Osun that people can trust? Sophia, can you hear me? Sophia, if you can hear me, so I just asked that based on the report from observers of Yaga Africa deployed to some local government areas in Osun State, what is their assessment? What is the overall report? And does it show that this election is what people in the state can trust in terms of the process and hopefully the eventual outcome? Sophia, can you please say something? Okay, so while we cannot, of course, secure a quality audio feed from Sophia, I'll just push that question to Jake and get your reaction as regards the process of this election up until this time that collation is being done. You actually gave INEC some relative appreciable numbers in terms of their ability to conduct this election relatively peacefully. But then in terms of how the electorates are looking at or are anticipating that these election results should pan out, is this something that we can trust?
I'll say yes. By the way, there's a combination of all the EU SDGN implementing partner. Yaga was one of them. So the figures that I was giving you and some of the assessment report is a collective report from all of us, including TAF Africa. So take, for instance, yes, in answer to the direct answer to your question, yes, I think Osun tend to be something relatively different, an improvement of Ekiti, of Anambra State, and all of these off-cycle elections that we've been part of. There is a relative improvement on the part of INEC. And I think there's something that is worthy of commendation for INEC. I was very concerned when the last-minute inclusion of the SDP candidate was mentioned, because the implication of that is that INEC had to jettison all the result sheets, the ballot paper, and everything that she printed prior to the pronouncement of that court judgment. And for them to navigate through that situation and still was able to deploy relatively on time, it's worthy of commendation. As a matter of fact, I got a call from INEC chairman when he wanted to know my assessment, or my organization's assessment of inclusivity. I did use the opportunity to congratulate him and said that for him to weather through that crisis at the time in question is very commendable, you know. And so is it something that people can trust? Up until now, I will say yes.
Okay.
But then the issue right now lies on collation. And I don't think anyone, and I repeat, anyone, wants to mess up that process. There are some information making rounds on social media that there's some sort of suspicion that a declaration of inconclusive election, that will be disastrous, and that shouldn't be at all. This process, I have been part of it months before now, and was part of it throughout today. There's no sign that anything was inconclusive. The people came out en masse, they voted, and I'm sure they voted the candidate of their choice, and I don't care who wins, but let the one who has been voted win.
Okay, Festus, let me come to you now. Well, we still need to draw our attention to the issue around BVAS malfunction. I mean, there have been questions as to if we've gotten it right, or have gotten to a stage of maturity when it comes to integrating technology into our electoral cycle. There were also reports around the importation of certain non-actors into the states to disrupt the election process, and also the case of vote monitoring at polling booths. So these realities, is this something that we cannot do without? Is this something we need to accept? Because we're looking at 2027 elections coming around, and we need to be sure if it's going to be credible, or this is something we just have to live with.
But thank you very much. Let me actually pick from the issue of BVAS, because in polling units that we visited today, actually 95% of the polling unit visited, like I made mention earlier, 140, 95% of the polling units, BVAS actually worked optimally. But not to say that there are not some challenges, like 5% of these polling units, actually we had issue with BVAS not actually responding, some very slow. And of course, so we were in some polling units in which BVAS couldn't capture the faces of people that they have to use thumbprint and things like that. At least we recorded issue of BVAS malfunctioning in Elisha West, Ward 5, Unit 3. Of course, we saw some cases too in Ife Central, Ward 11, Unit 22. Oshogbo Ward 6, Unit 8. Although INEC, we must confess, INEC actually respond promptly to this issue of BVAS, because some of these issues were actually rectified within like 30 minutes to 30 to 40 minutes. Okay. So we need to actually commend INEC on that. The issue of engagement of external people, we saw in the news in which some people were arrested because they brought in external people who plan to vote. Actually, some of these processes usually happen during continuous voters registration and things like that. And to me, it's something we can actually do without. It's something that we need to sensitize our electoral system. We can do without it. We don't need to be dubious. We don't need to be desperate in actually taking power. Things should be done orderly. So as it stands now, I think preparing for 2027, of course, we need to work more on BVAS functionality. We need to do that. It's actually very important because take for instance now, there are some polling units that as at 8 a.m., although very few, they are still counting. They are still counting because BVAS was somehow slow, and we have some polling units over 1,000 eligible voters, even some close to 2,000. And in situations like that, you only have one BVAS, and so it usually make a voting process very difficult. And completion of that voting is always being delayed. So moving ahead now, there is need actually to split some of these polling units so that we can have fewer eligible voters at that polling unit. But all of that things are something that can actually be dealt with. The issue of vote buying, of course, can actually be dealt with. We can actually strengthen the system, the electoral system. INEC is doing well, because if we are to look at some of the challenges, pre-election issues, do you want to talk about the NURTW saga? Do you want to talk about the last-minute introduction of a political party, things like that? But despite all these challenges, at least INEC was able to respond promptly to this. So the same ideology, the same thinking should actually be taken to a general election 2027. We need to strengthen everything, because general election is not like this gubernatorial election. It's just the only state they are.
Now, fine. Now, Jake, we saw a couple of electorates in several polling units who blew the whistle against vote inducers. Some seized cash, from them, and in some instances, we saw them apprehend those that they alleged were trying to, buy people's votes with money. When you look at the conduct of the electorate in this particular election, does it show that Nigerians are becoming more conscious now of their civic responsibility?
Well said. Yes. You will see that people are becoming very conscious and protective of their vote and the voting process as well. They are gaining more awareness, displaying more responsibility, and taking the bull by the horn in protecting the sanctity of the ballot. So we saw this today play out immensely, where the people were ready to protect their vote. There was incidents of some of them arresting these thugs and those who wanted to come, who wanted to snatch their ballot boxes. It's even trending on social media, and that's a good thing. Vote trading, because the nomenclature is no longer vote buying, it's vote trading, because they are buyers and they are sellers, is really plaguing our democratic process. And something real quick has to be done, and it has to be done from a legal point of view. And that's where the security operatives, who one time or the other have arrested individuals suspected to be involved in vote trading, and then before the sun will go down, they get a call from Abuja or from one security agency or the other, and they are released. So when there is no punitive measure, the vote trading will continue. And the earlier we begin to arrest those who are involved in this illicit act and prosecute them and put them in jail, not necessarily putting the son or the daughter of a poor person But some of these highly placed individuals that their children or their wards are involved in this illicit trading that is really ruining the democratic integrity of our entire process. So, yeah, that said, it's important that we begin to take cognizance of some of these lapses because they are signposts to what is likely to play out in 2027. This election remains a test run of what is likely to play out in 2027. If we get it right, we'll get 2027 right.
Yeah.
If we get it wrong, it will play out in 2027.
All right. So in terms of getting it right, Festus, before this election, we saw the police in the states embark on a show of force. Well, despite that, we still recorded we still, noticed some areas where there were political disruptors. Of course, political thugs visited some polling units, shot into the air, allegedly chased away voters, and were able to make away with the ballot papers or the ballot boxes. Now, you are a person on ground. How do we ensure that we deter would-be political disruptors, these political thugs, from accessing polling units? How do we make it safe so that we can prevent voter apathy moving forward from here?
Right, thank you very much. Actually, we were somewhat surprised with the numbers of electorates that we saw today, because if we are to look at the pre-election situation of the states, of course, we've been on ground for many years, and we have actually been tracking the process for the past 4 months. Honestly, the environment had been very tense. Courts actually have the day, gunshots here and there, killing people, and things like that. If we want to have an election day free of violence, it's not going to be on that same day. There are a lot of efforts that must actually be put in place before the election day. The truth of the matter is, if we have been having pre-election situation that has been violent, there is no way we can actually have election day that will be peaceful. Don't let us deceive ourselves. It's actually very important. Because take, for instance, in local government like Ede North, that we were today, Ede North, Irewole, Egbedore, Olorunda, Boripe. So these are local governments that actually recorded some forms of violence, that some people actually destroyed ballot boxes and things like that. And it's not actually strange, because before today, we have actually recorded a lot of pre-election violence. According to our JDPMC JV, Justice Development and Peacemaker Center Election Vigilance Dashboard, we actually recorded, the one we recorded in terms of deaths, we recorded 10, that we actually have numbers with this. So we were beginning to speculate. We even set ourselves a hypothesis if people will actually come out. There are some places take for instance in Elisha, that they were saying, I voted, I voted, we are come out. It's as if something, it's as if the environment is peaceful. So if we want to have peaceful election day, we need to work on pre-election situation. We need to work on, we need to, whosoever that disrupt the peace of the land must actually be brought to book. There are situations in which political gladiators use some of these thugs as their accomplices. So definitely there is no way we can have peaceful election. So if at all we want peaceful election, then anyone that violates that disturb the peace of the land must be prosecuted accordingly, without any sense of partiality. And that has been the situation we've been having. Okay. Like in the previous election situation that we said, we had reports of thugs, being supervised or being accompanied by security operatives, which ought not to be. There shouldn't be any respect for thugs that disrupt the peace of the land. So the truth of the matter is, we need to work on the situation we must not shield anyone that has actually disrupt the peace of the land.
Okay. Of course, Festus, Ojewumi, and Epelle, thank you so much for your time on the news. We hope that we can take these lessons in our strides and ensure that 2027 general elections will be credible. Of course, it was nice talking to you on the news.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.